I could not predict where my friend Jimmy Childre would go or what he would accomplish in life when we were kids. I suppose I never even tried to predict it. I do know we grew up together and experienced the first 18 years of our life together in our small rural town in Middle Georgia. I also know we have remained close friends our entire lives. You're about to hear a story about a rare friendship that has lasted 70 years and counting. Jimmy strongly believes that growing up in the little town of Reynolds, Georgia, and surrounded by the people who influenced him was the key, or at least one of the keys, to his success in life. Just for the record, and to set this conversation up, I should at least tell you a little of what he has accomplished. He's a third-generation automobile dealer, former hospital CEO, consultant, researcher, and community leader. He's a fellow in the American College of Healthcare Executives and a fellow of practice in the Center for Social Innovation at the University of Cambridge. Jimmy holds a Master of Studies from the University of Cambridge and a Master of Research from HEC Paris. He has earned a Global MBA and a Health Sector Management Certificate from Duke University, completed the Harvard Business School's Honors President's Management Program, and holds a BBA in Accounting from Georgia Southern University. He has served on too many boards to mention, but they include the National Dealer Council for Ford Motor Company, the Georgia Alliance for Community Hospitals, Chair Emeritus of Georgia Southern Foundation, Duke University's Fuqua School of Business Alumni Council, and the Center for the Advancement of Social Entrepreneurship Advisory Board. Jimmy currently serves on the Duke University School of Medicine Board of Directors and the Duke Alumni Board. He also chairs the Healthcare Special Interest Group for Harvard Business School of Atlanta, is a director of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, is on the Carter Center's Board of Counselors. I will also mention a few of the accolades that have come his way. I attended the dinner in Sandersville when he was named Washington County Citizen of the Year. I was also at the banquet in Statesboro when Jimmy received the Talent Award, the highest honor bestowed on an alumnus of Georgia Southern University. As for his day job in the Ford dealership he opened in 1980, Jimmy has won Ford Motor Company's prestigious Chairman's Award for exemplary sales and customer service. In 2021, he was selected for Ford Motor Company's Hometown Hero Award, another national award recognizing Jimmy Childre and Childre Ford as one of the top 5 dealerships in the United States for service to their community, customer loyalty, and employee satisfaction. In 2022, Jimmy Childre was featured by Georgia Trend magazine as one of Georgia's 500 most influential leaders. But this conversation you will hear is not really about all that, but you need to know some of that to understand the man who is talking to me. But this story is more about the important stuff and what led him to do what he did and what makes him tick. The truth is, I wanted to get Jimmy on the record talking about his life in the early years. At some point, those who come after us will realize what he accomplished, and they can listen to this and learn about the man that I know as well as anyone, the man behind the passion he brings to whatever he tackles. After all, I am qualified. We have been friends for life. As we begin this conversation, I have Miss Sylvia, his soon-to-be 90-year-old mother from St. Augustine, Florida, on the phone. You can listen in on our conversation before I bring in Jimmy.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.
How are you feeling?
I'm doing pretty good to be almost 90.
Are you really
I'll
90?
be 90 in March.
Golly. Your oldest son is 70, so that's got to be about right?
When I meet somebody that's y'all's age, and I hear what, we talk about age, I think, I could be their mother.
Yeah.
Be somebody that's grown that feels like an older person.
Well,
I can't believe it.
I'm seeing the same thing. I mean, when you When I was growing up, you were young. You were a young mother.
Exactly.
And life goes by in a hurry, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? And
Golly.
all the people that, I was friends with the Reynolds have now passed and gone on.
I know. And same with me.
There was an older group like your mother, daddy, and all, and then there was a group that was just a little bit older, all the same age as me, like Nick and Thomas Bird,
All right.
Robert and Richard Parks,
Right.
Mark and Sidney Bryan.
Yep.
I mean, everybody's gone, but
I'll tell you what the most amazing thing is, that you still got your mind. You remember everything, and I know people that are a lot younger than you that are slipping. And so that's another scary thing, That's why we got to record this stuff, so to be people coming behind us can hear us, because we're going to forget this stuff, if we don't hurry up.
I feel so fortunate.
Yeah, well, you're amazing.
So fortunate.
I've got so many wonderful memories for sure. We were blessed to grow up at the time we did and the place we did. Jimmy and I have said that many, many times, and I know that that's had a lot to do with whatever we've done in life is how we grew up. But we figured that out anyway.
I figured Jimmy thinks that too.
Yeah, he does. I know the first memory, I guess, that I have in life, and it's only because it's a memory because I've seen the video, was Jimmy and I getting christened together at the Methodist Church, and it was in December of 1954. And, of course, I found an old video of that. Of course, Jimmy and I have both seen it several times. Just tell us, what do you remember about that day, if you remember it? I'm sure you do. When we were christened, how did that happen that we both got christened together?
Well, y'all were born so close together, and you were 3 months old, and it was in December, 70 years ago this month, right?
Yep, right. Probably exactly 70 years ago. It was close to Christmas, I think. Yeah.
Exactly, it was.
Amazing.
And it was time to have y'all christened, and it was the best thing we could ever have done for you. That was the best gift I could ever have given Jimmy, and I'm sure Nail felt the same, to try to start you off on the best road we could. And it worked. God has been so good to both of you and to both of us mothers.
It's crazy that we started off, we were christened together, and we're still best friends 70 years later. That's crazy when you think about it, isn't it? But we've literally kept up with each other and stayed in touch our entire lives. I mean, that's nuts, right?
I think it's wonderful. So fortunate y'all have each other. I love that.
We don't pull any punches. There's no put-ons. We know everything about each other, so we can be ourselves, whenever we talk, which is often. So who else got christened that day? Did anybody else, or just us two? Do you remember?
I don't remember anybody else.
When we were growing up, and I think I've seen a video, or maybe you've mentioned it, that you and my mother would, since we were so close in age, Jimmy and I were so close in age, you'd push us through town, and we kind of hung around each other even as toddlers. We were too young to remember.
Yeah.
So talk about that a little bit.
The first thing that happened was at our first little house. One day when y'all were just babies in the springtime, Naya called me. And you were the fourth of her children,
Right.
her baby. And Jimmy was the first of mine. And I was only 19 years old. And when Naya called me and said, I'm going to stroll Bruce to the park, and I'm going to come by your place, and you join us, and we'll go to the park. And I thought, this is wonderful. Naya knows all about being a mother, and I can just watch her and be a good mother to Jimmy, because she's had all this experience.
She was like 40, I guess.
I know. So I thought I could learn a lot from her, because I was 19. She was more than twice my age.
Right. Wow.
And so I remember it just real well. I forgot what color stroller you had, but Jimmy's was red and white striped. And we would go up to the park, and once in a while, Mary Louise Crawley would see us, and she'd put the twins in the double stroller and bring them over.
And we stayed friends with them until the day they died, too. Isn't that amazing?
I know that.
Yeah.
Isn't that wonderful?
what's crazy is we all went different ways. It's not like we all stayed in rentals. We've been all over everywhere, but we still stayed in contact and stayed to be friends, as we have with their older brother, Charles.
I know. And everybody turned out so well. All 5 of y'all.
What are your memories of us when we got to be preteens and teenagers? And when we got older, we stayed with each other, hung out all the time. I know you remember me being in and out of your house all the time. And
Yes.
Jimmy even stayed with us when Ernie had his surgery. I don't know how that came about. Do you remember that?
Yes, of course. They mentioned it. It looked like it was a given thing. Of course, Jimmy will be staying with us. And I was so glad.
Yeah. Well,
I
I
was so
remember.
glad because Jimmy needed that stability to stay with y'all, because I remember as we drove off in the car to go to the airport, Uncle Ed was taking us. And I looked back and Jimmy was leaning, hugging the tree in the front yard and crying as we drove off. And I thought to myself, well, it can't be helped, but he's going to be in the best hands he can be in while we're gone.
And that was what year? 66?
Yeah, well, Ernie was born in 61.
So 67. Yeah.
No,
Okay.
67.
Yeah. Well, I guarantee you I remember that. He was having open heart surgery, it's not like it is today, that's for sure. And when y'all left, you didn't know whether you're going to get to bring him back or not, is the reality. And that was a rare surgery back then. And I know that's part of Jimmy's emotion, was not only that y'all leaving, but would he see his brother again?
That's exactly right. He had a 50-50 chance of living through the surgery, but without the surgery he had done. So there was nothing to do but go ahead. And they did 1 morning at that time. And they would come and get the babies before day and take them into surgery. And there was a little boy from England that went the day before Ernie. And he was 3 years old. And I remember them coming by outside Ernie's room, and he had on yellow pajamas with the feet in them, and he was dragging his teddy bear by the ear. And then later, when the surgery was over, I heard his mother screaming, and he didn't make it. And I had to let Ernie go next. I had to, because there was no choice.
Well, Jimmy and I, through all that, that was a very good bonding time for us as little young teenagers. If it was 67, we were 13 years old. That was earlier in the year. That was something that's in my mind forever, just the whole thought of that. Not only the fact that he stayed at the house, but the fact what was going on. And we were old enough to know that it was serious. I can tell you that. That's it for sure.
I know. And I remember Naya having y'all pray every night.
Yep. We would go in the bedroom at night, and Mama or Daddy or somebody would read a couple of verses in the Bible, and we would pray for Ernie every night. That's something that happened in Mama's bedroom all my life, but I remember Jimmy joined us during that time praying for his little brother, and that's something that we'll take with us forever too. What are your thoughts of Jimmy and I, who you raised both of us being friends all these years later? What do you think about that? 70 years.
I think it's the greatest gift that God could have given you, to have each other as an example and as someone that always had each other's backs and that you could always count on in the good times and the bad times. You had each other, and you were only a phone call away from each other.
Isn't that amazing?
It is.
From your perspective, the Methodist Church, everything revolved around the school and the church when we were growing up in rentals, and we were there all the time. Well, how do you see that as the importance of that in Jimmy and I's life?
I think it's been so important that I think when it's you and Jimmy's time to go, the Lord will say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant."
Well, that's a compliment coming from you. I can tell you that, and I know Jimmy feels the same way.
It meant everything, and I just felt like that morning that you were both christened, that we were putting you in the best hands that we could possibly do, and it worked that way.
I know that you are proud of what Jimmy has accomplished in life. I mean, we can go on and on. You know it. I know it. Not everybody knows it, but he's done a lot. He's done a lot in business world and giving of himself and volunteering and all the stuff he's done. Talk about your pride in that.
I have a lot of pride in that. I'm not surprised at all. But more important than that is I'm proud of Jimmy's heart.
Right.
He has the best heart in the world, and if someone passes away and he knew him, he's going to be there to show his respect for that life. And so as much as I admire his mind, I cherish his heart most.
That's right. And he loves his mama, I can tell you that. And he loves his daddy, and he looks after you. I'll never forget, we were at the lake, and he went out to eat with Kathy and me, and he got a phone call sitting at the table. We just ordered, and that's when Ernie had an issue, and they had taken him by ambulance to Jacksonville. And Jimmy got up and left and said, I got to go. And he left with his food hadn't even come, and he was headed to St. Augustine, or I guess to Jacksonville, to see about Ernie. That's kind of what he's done. He's put family a priority over everything, right?
I know, and I always knew that's the first thing to do was call Jimmy. He would know what to do, and he would be there, and that meant a lot to me forever.
You did well raising him. He's been a good friend of mine, I can tell you that, for many, many, many years, 70 years, literally 70 years. We're very close to the actual date that we got christened 70 years ago right now. It's very fitting to have you on here.
I'll tell you a story.
Okay.
When Jimmy Carter was running for president, the reporter knocked on his mother's door, Miss Lydia's door. And she answered the door, and she said yes. And they said, what do you think about your son running his campaign? They said he's running for a president, and she said, president of what? And they said, the United States. She said, oh, well, I think he'll do a good job. That's the way I feel about Jimmy.
Whatever it is, right? He can do a good job.
Yeah, whatever it is. I think he'll do a good job.
Well, amazing.
And Jimmy loved his little brothers and sisters. He didn't even want to go to school, and his daddy tells a story when they were little that he wanted to stay home rather than just go to first grade and stuff. And so he'd take him to school, and he'd say, now have a good day, son. And Jimmy Jr. would say, I don't shake, I can.
I don't think I can, huh?
Yeah.
That is wonderful. Wow. Jimmy, you got anything you want her to talk about while we got her?
No, Bruce, I've just enjoyed hearing this and reflecting on it. Mama talking about how important the church was to us and starting off with being Christian together. I've seen the film the 8mm that you found so many times. I feel like I remember the day, but I'm sure it's 3 months old. We actually don't remember it.
Right. That's the thing. It's almost like my first memory, but it's really a video memory because there's no way we remembered it.
But
I remember driving up to the side door of the church, and we got out and went in the side door. And then when it was over, we came back out, and that we were standing there. I think Big Jimmy Jr.'s daddy was holding him, and Nell was holding you.
Yep.
And you were doing something to your blanket, Bruce.
Yeah.
Rubbing your blanket.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Jr. was looking at you,
That's what the old video shows, and the home movie we used to call them. But here's something, Mama, that I noticed when I saw that the very first time. You're right. Daddy was holding me, and Miss Nair was holding Bruce, and they walked toward each other, and somebody else was holding the camera, obviously. And Bruce, I had a serious look on my face.
Yeah, you did.
And Bruce Bruce was laughing, and he looked down and pointed, sort of motioned toward a rattler that was attached to his blanket. And I looked at it, and then he shook it. And when he shook it, he started laughing, and then I started laughing.
Oh.
And that has been the story of our 70 years together. Bruce has always made me laugh. He's always started the jokes. And when we were growing up, I was often his straight man when he was telling these tales to our friends and making them laugh.
That is true.
Mama,
And that still goes on today.
That's right. It's Daddy's always said that people don't change; they just grow up, they mature, and that's exactly. And I believe him now. That's exactly right. Bruce and I started off in the same roles that we have today. He's the one that makes everybody laugh. I'm the one that tends to be more serious, and I play his straight man whenever he's going into whatever's going to make the room laugh.
And that's really played out in public a lot of times, because over the years, as you know, Jimmy and I both have done a whole lot of speaking. I've introduced Jimmy and he's introduced me, and sometimes the introduction of each other is a whole lot better than what the other one has to say because we play off of that. Isn't that true, Jimmy?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
As y'all grew older, the Chevrolet place was across the street from Goddard's.
Yep.
And we bought everything that we had from Goddard's and to eat. And my mother would call Goddard's and with her list, and then later she'd make the list and Zero would call. What was his name that would come and bring the groceries?
Hanson.
That's what I thought it was.
Hanson, yeah.
He would come to the back door and bring the groceries.
Yeah.
And then as my children got older, they would just go to Goddard's and say, charge it.
Yep.
And we would charge it. And Ernie would go in, and he was too little to get it. He loved banana popsicles that y'all had. And he would climb inside the freezer, which was like a chest type thing, and get his banana popsicle and then go tell Miss Ruth to charge it to Mama.
Isn't that amazing? And you bought that, and we bought the cars from across the street. Right before I turned 16, I saw Miss Verna Lucas trade in her 64 push-button Plymouth, and I had saved up enough money, and I walked over there, and I dealt with your daddy, Miss Sylvia, and I remember I paid cash $775 for that car of my own money, and I wasn't old enough to drive it. I got it probably in August, a month before I turned 16. But I bought that car, and I was standing across the street when I saw her trading it in. I said, Daddy, that's got to be a good car. And it was like 30,000 miles on it. I drove that car till the wheels came off. We got more memories. Than we can shake a stick at here. I can tell you that. Wow.
I know. And my favorite place in the entire world. And I lay here at night, and I'm thinking about the past. And this always is in the center of it, is the Reynolds Methodist Church.
Right. That's a beautiful place, isn't it?
It's so beautiful. It brings such peace to think about it. And I love Christmas Eve there. I love Christmas Eve.
Yeah, that's when you went by, like just families went by to take communion. Yeah, we did that all my life. That was a regular thing we did on Christmas Eve. You'd go in and wait on whatever family was taking communion. You'd sit down and be quiet, and they got up. You go down, and somebody else would be coming in. I remember doing that.
Exactly. There's nothing sweeter than that, I don't think.
Literally, some of my greatest memories in life was Christmas Eve, going down there to that church, and people.
See, I did it as a little girl. I was raised in that church, and I loved it as a little girl. And then I love for my children to know it.
Mama, I think about that. I remember doing it exactly like Bruce described. And the odds were probably, I don't remember exactly who was in there every time, but I'm sure that Bruce and his family were in there right in front of us or right behind us. But that church brings back so many fond and sad memories, times of loss for our family. All the funerals of everybody in our family have been held there and conducted by the Goddard family.
I remember your daddy Ed standing in the back of the church when there would be funerals. Very dignified. He did such a good job with funerals.
The first funeral I ever attended was my grandfather, Childre, I think. Over the years, obviously many more. But Mama, there's nobody that conducts a funeral like Mr. Ed did in Bruce's family. The God, you talked about how Mr. Ed stood in the back reverently. Everything they did about a funeral showed so much respect, sincere respect to the family that was suffering loss and to the others that went mourning there. The Goddards did that unlike anything I've ever seen anywhere else.
They did.
As you mentioned earlier, I have been to a lot of them, unfortunately.
It's the truth.
But nothing like what they do.
It's true.
That's quite a compliment, and I thank you for that. I was raised in the middle of that, where what went on behind the scenes and putting on a funeral. You would be astonished that what we did and what my granddaddy did and my daddy did. I watched them both, and Mac did, and I did later with him and all that. We synchronized watches. That was nothing by chance. It was a ceremony from the get-go. We didn't want to miss a beat. That when the funeral started, it was right on the minute of the hour, not a minute before or after, where people were seated, where they walked in, where they came out, what car they got in. I can go on and on. It was a production. It was a ceremony. And those days are kind of gone, too. That heard this, I know you have, show me the way a nation cares for its dead, and I will measure with mathematical exactness the tender mercies of its people. And there's more to that. Gladstone said that, but that's with the rest of society, that is going by the wayside. It's just not that kind of ceremony, that kind of respect for a life lived. You don't see it like you did, and that's sad to me. That's along with a lot of other stuff that's going by the wayside, but that's one of them that I think about, and I've lived and I've seen it for sure.
And Bruce, when you took over the funeral home, I'll never forget the night, and I'm sure there are hundreds and hundreds of other people that have a similar memory to what I'm about to describe. I'll never forget the night when my grandmother, Childre, my grandmother Emmeline, we called her Ninny Line. When Ninny Line passed away about 2 o'clock one morning here in the hospital in Sandersville, I picked up the phone and called you and woke you up. I said, Bruce, Ninny Line just died. Will you come get her? You said, I'm on my way. I'll never forget it.
That's an important time in the family's life. When you called me, and that plays out over and over to anybody that's ever been in this business, not just me, but when you called me when your grandmother died, you didn't want me to send somebody. You were wanting me to come over there.
Exactly.
Very quickly I did. And everybody thinks that, and that's what I did. And that's changed. They pay people to make the removals, and all that's changed. But anyway, that's interesting. Wow. I don't know how we got talking about that. But
Well,
that's for sure.
I think it's a good thing to talk about, because what your family has done for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other families is immeasurable. And it should be talked about. It should be noted. And Bruce, that's a lot of who you are and who you became, because I've watched it for 70 years. This is one thing I do know, that I'm confident that I know what I'm talking about on this.
And it meant so much.
Wow.
It meant so much, because you're grieving and you need to feel comfortable as you can, and you need to feel like everything went well for the person that's passed away. And your family always, you felt assured it would be the best it could be.
Well, on a more happier note, talking about our church, the Reynolds Methodist Church, Mac is preaching there now, Bruce's oldest brother. And Bruce, I remember when you and I were teenagers, sitting out in the pews, Mac would come home from college and maybe speak that Sunday in the pulpit when he was in his training. Now Mac has rejuvenated the church. Everybody I talked to over there is loving it. I've been there several times. Mama's watched it many, many times on the broadcast in the mornings.
Yes.
And again, your family is still contributing to that church.
He's really enjoying that. You know, he's about to be 83 in just a month. Early February, he'll be 83. So he's doing that on an interim basis, but he's loving it. There's no question about it. And Annis is loving it. You know, her mother was a member of that church when they built it. She was alive. She was a teenager when they built that church. So and then her parents were members of that church. So Annis being back in her home church is, you know, what goes around comes around, and that's a full circle thing with Mac and Annis being there right now doing that transition over there. That's pretty cool for sure.
Yeah, there's a sense of peace.
Yeah.
When you're sitting in that church. And I remember right before we took Ernie to John Hopkins, I guess maybe it was the day before, the doors were open, and I went up there to the church by myself, and I went down to the altar, and I prayed to God to please let him come home with me. Not in a box, but in my arms. And when I think of that church, I think of the doors being open in the front. And I love the Mother's Day when you had baskets of roses for people growing. I was little. If your mother was alive, you got a red rose to wear.
Right.
If your mother had passed away, someone pinned a white rose on you.
Yeah. I remember that too. I remember.
And Aunt Mary was a Sunday school leader for 30 years. In the back, she was reassuring in the background, and then in the front, there was all the reassurance. You could just look at the stained glass windows, the wood, the altar. It was just so comforting, and I wanted my children to have it.
Wow.
And I love the fact that my daddy gave the chimes.
Yep.
I love
They
the chimes.
still use them. Yeah.
Yeah, Jimmy and I talk about it. Our favorite time of day is that time of day that's late in the afternoon. And it might be started with, in my memory, of me hearing the chimes late in the afternoon. It's like it's a signal to go home with your family, be together, and remember who you are and what life means. I loved it. I wish everybody could have it.
When you get to be almost 90, you look back, those things that you're talking about become the most important memories you have in life, don't they?
They are. They are. And now that I have so much time, I'm not working, of course, anymore, and I spend a lot of time thinking about that.
I'm sure you do. I know you had a lot of great friends. You've been gone from Taylor County a long time, but you built relationships there as a young, like Jimmy and I did, that lasted the rest of your life, and the best memories in life that you have came from there. It was a special place. It was a special group of people. That's why it was a special place, because of the unique group of people that was gathered there, right?
You're right. I want everything to stay just the same.
Yeah.
I want it just like I could step back in it like it was.
Yeah. The problem is things change, don't they? Gracious.
I know.
It does. It does.
I think when all is said and done, for you too, the good Lord's going to say, well done, my good and faithful servants.
I hope that's correct. That'd be a good thing for us to hear, wouldn't it, Jimmy?
Yeah, it would, Bruce.
There's no question about it. Miss Sylvia, I love you very much. I've known you my entire life. I've got a tremendous amount of respect for you. I remember I'd always, when we vacationed down in St. Augustine, I always stopped by to see y'all in there. And it was like
Thank you.
We just pick up from wherever we left off. And I would always go by when you had the store on the beach down there. So you keep on keeping on, and it's good to hear your voice. I love you very much. Thank you for talking to us,
Thank
okay?
you for being such a good friend for Jimmy. It's been a lot.
Well, thank you for helping raise both of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. There's a couple of things I'd say about the conversation we just had with your mother is hearing her voice right now is one thing. She's almost 90 years old. When she is dead and gone one day, and who knows, she may outlive both of us, but odds are she won't. When you get to hear her voice saying the things that she just said, this conversation will be a treasure for you, don't you think?
Absolutely. I appreciate so much you offering and you suggesting and offering that to bring Mama into the conversation that we're going to have. Because I think I enjoyed hearing her talk about it, but Bruce, it even gave me insight into our friendship and our relationship.
Yeah.
Thinking about how it started with our mothers.
To hear her say that and say what she said is one day you're going to sit down and really listen to this. I'd give anything to have my mother or my daddy saying this kind of stuff. We just didn't have the capability of doing it. Now we can hit a button and do this kind of stuff. It's pretty neat. So, Jim, let's just follow up with what she was talking about. She was talking about the church and how important the church has been. So let's talk about with us. Talk about I know that church has had a special place in your heart, and you've traveled the world. But coming back to Reynolds, Georgia, the thing you think about when you come back is that church. So just talk about, from your perspective, piggybacking on what your mama said, how important that church has been to you.
Well, Bruce, when we were growing up, that was our church. That was the church. And when you're younger and that's the only place you don't think as much about it until you get older and you're away from it. And then experiencing other places. Every time I go into the Methodist Church in Reynolds, the one where we were christened, it's like coming home. It's like the place I want to be is the place I need to be. I've had the opportunity to travel and have services in some of the most well-known cathedrals in the world and chapels around at the University of Cambridge and grand churches around this country and other places in Europe. I've been in churches in South America and other places, as I said, but there's no place like that place. One, I think it's the most beautiful one anywhere. But the warm memories that we have, the comfort of our loved ones that were there with us, in the teachings we received there, the way our Sunday school teachers and our ministers were motivated to cultivate our spiritual life and lead us in a way that we would learn to appreciate it and embrace it for our whole lives. I just feel like that we're the luckiest guys in the world to have had the opportunity to experience that.
One of the funny things is, we both know well, the Baptist church, there were some other churches obviously outside of town and all that, a lot of churches in the county, but in Reynolds, in the city, in the park, the Methodist church was on one side and the Baptist church was on the other. Whenever the Baptists had something special going on, the Methodists would close the church and go to what the Baptists would do the same. But one of the most amazing things is that some of the parents, the people that grew up as a Methodist, their husband or wife may have grown up as a Baptist. They went to different churches.
I remember.
You remember that? I mean, that's how.
I do remember it.
Yeah,
I do remember.
And they would meet together too. You know, anytime they have special things, they wasn't mad at each other, but they were members of different churches. You don't even hear that at all anymore, right?
We don't. No, I can remember a couple of our friends that were going to the Baptist church, but their dad may come to the Methodist church.
My grandparents, my grandmother, Goddard, Lucy Goddard, was a Methodist, and my granddaddy was a Baptist. That never changed.
Yeah.
It was very unusual. Jimmy, I think the building was beautiful and the teachings, but there was also a unique group of people that we were around our entire lives, adults and people a little older than us and people our age. Just talk about the importance of the people, the salt of the earth people that we grew up around. I know that's got to be the reason that we appreciate it so much, more than any other reason.
Well, Bruce, I agree with you. I've said this before, and I think I wrote this in the foreword to your book, that the people that were our Sunday school teachers were also the merchants in town and the school teachers we had during the week. Everybody played multiple roles in our community of Reynolds, and everybody wanted others to succeed. I don't remember a competition. I don't remember people being envious of someone that did well. It was all a sincere effort. When I was talking to my mom before you interviewed her, I said, Mama, what do you remember most about Reynolds? And before I could finish describing what I was looking for, she said, the first thing I remember is it was a good place and a safe place.
Right.
And I agree with that. It was safety, not only in yourself, but in your emotions and your development. And the intent was good. Bruce, there were a lot of smart people that this culture was generational. It was passed down from one generation to the other. And each next generation was the beneficiaries of what the work that those had done before them.
Right.
And we got to experience all of these people. You and I have talked about it and named off many of the families, and we've walked through the cemetery in Reynolds, and we walked by the graves and reflected on who they were and what they did and what they meant to us growing up.
We talk about schools, and I said earlier, our lives revolved around church and school, and the school was a unique place. Talk about I know you've heard your daddy talk about the importance of that school and how it was unique and how influential that place was to a lot of folks. What are your memories of that?
Well, Bruce, my memories for us are the wonderful teachers we had all through school, starting with the first grade with Miss Verner, and then the ones we had in junior high school with Miss Payne and Miss Betty Watley and Miss Ruth Jones. We had wonderful teachers all the way through school. And many of those teachers had been hired by the principal, Mr. Joyner, that taught our parents. I've heard Daddy talk about that when he went to college, and a lot of people in his age groups and all, they would exempt math courses. I don't know if they called it that then, like they do now, where you took a test and exempt. But they didn't. The early part of their college careers were not that challenging to them because of the training they'd had at Reynolds High School. I've heard people talk about that when they applied to college back in those days, that when they saw that they were graduates of Reynolds High School, they were automatically accepted. That was a simpler day then, and things were done differently, but that's indicative of the reputation that Reynolds High School had. And a lot of that is attributed to Mr. Joyner, the principal there. I've heard that from people over and over and over. You know, Bruce, recently you sent me a video of a physician, Dr. Will Camp Seeley, that had a career at Duke, and I saw an interview, a lengthy interview with him from someone there. And they were asking him about where he grew up. He said he was born in Roberta, but grew up in Reynolds. And he started talking about the town of Reynolds and the education system there. He said, most people in our class were expected to go to college, and most of us did. And I think this would have been in the 20s, maybe early 30s. So think about that. How many people from that school system went to college and what they did with their lives and their careers afterwards?
I can tell you, I counted, I think, 30 medical doctors that I know that came from Reynolds. The one you're talking about, Will Camp Seeley, is actually, as you know, but others may not know, is known as the father of arrhythmia surgery. And he's famous, was featured in Life magazine, and he graduated from Reynolds High School. And his brother was a cardiologist and making it very well known.
Dr. Hughes.
Yeah, you can go on and on with the people. We just know recently, just as we're talking, just this week, Dr. Jack Fountain passed away, and this guy's got a degree at Georgia Tech. He's was a neurologist and a well-known head of the neurology department at Grady, married to a doctor. He did well. He just passed away with a brain tumor, of all things. But you can go on and on of the people that came out
Bruce,
of this town.
his mother was our first grade teacher, Miss Berner.
Yep.
That we all loved and adored.
Yep. No question.
She taught us to read.
That is for sure. You mentioned it. Not only did Mr. Joyner teach our parents, but Miss Ogburn, if you remember, was co-teaching when we were in first grade with Miss Vernal. Miss Ogburn had half the class, and we had but Miss Ogburn, so she taught us some. Miss Ogburn taught my daddy. Miss Wilma Hollis taught my daddy. And I know he taught your daddy. So we had the teachers that were generational teachers, same people. That's crazy when you think about it, isn't it?
And Bruce, a lot of our teachers were either parents or grandparents of our classmates. And like you said, they taught our parents too.
Like Miss Bird, Chuck called her Mama Bird, and we couldn't say Mama Bird at school, but we'd say Mama Bird when we're not at school. We had to say Miss Bird at school. I mean, it was a job keeping up with all that, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah. Well, we can go on and on about the people, but I wanted to really follow up with your mama's conversation. When you think about your mama, Jimmy, talk a little bit about what memories you have. I know she would love to hear you talking about her a little bit and about the importance she's been in your life. Just talk about your mom a little bit and memories you have. She went through a lot with Ernie's illness as a kid and through whatever life throws at you. Life's not easy for anybody, but she's been a rock for you, right?
She has, Bruce. Both of my parents have, my mom and my dad. But when I think about, as you said, Mama's experiences, Mama was real sick. I didn't understand this at the time, but she was real sick. And the doctor with tuberculosis, which was not unusual at the time that she grew up. And there were others that had it, and it was very contagious. And she had to finish school in a hospital in North Carolina, in Nashville. When she and Daddy wanted to get married, they were told that she could probably never have children or shouldn't try to, that her health was too frail. But they were determined to start a family. And I was the first. And I actually do remember this, thinking that life was just the three of us. And then we went off to the hospital and brought Bob back. My grandparents, my Childre grandparents, my granddaddy Ernest and my grandmother Emmeline, I remember them taking me to, I actually can remember this, or maybe I've been told the story so many times I think I remember it. But I was in the back seat of the car and I unwrapped a blanket that they had offered that they were taking to Bob. And by the time we got there, I had it wrapped all around me, and they took me in there and showed me Bob. And I became very, very jealous. And when they got home, it took me quite a little while at least, to warm up to the idea. Now there were four of us in this family. As you well know, Bob and I are best friends and have been all of our lives. And they, and then they went back to the hospital a year later and brought Linda home. And I thought, okay, so that's how that worked. When they leave, they bring another one home. And by the time they went to the hospital the fourth time and got Charlotte, they came home. And I had the routine figured out then. When I would see ladies, mama's friends drive up in the driveway, let's see, I would have been, when Charlotte was born, we were 5. And I would go get Charlotte out of her baby bed and take her to the living room and be standing there to show the new baby to my mama's friends when they would come calling. And then when they brought Ernie home 2 years later, that's when we found out that Ernie was sick. And what Mama didn't say in the interview, Bruce, is that when Ernie was born, there was no cure for what he had, no treatment, no repair for his heart condition. The common term that people refer to is blue babies. These babies that were born like that with tetralogy of Fallot don't get enough oxygen, and they came up with the cure at Johns Hopkins. And when Ernie was born, they were just doing a few experimental things, and they waited as long as they could. And when Ernie was 6, it was time to go. And by then, as Mama said, they were doing 1 per day, the only place in the world that did them. And it's very common to make that repair for children. So we were very, very fortunate.
What do you think the best attribute you got from your mom?
That's a really good question, because I have actually thought about it before and thought through it and tried to figure it out. I think it probably has to do with having empathy and compassion and sympathy for others, and try to understand that we all have shortcomings, and that it's important to understand that all people don't have exactly the same strengths, and to help those that need help and help those that we're able to help.
And the other thing, everybody is not dealt the same cards in life, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
And I know you got that. And then on the other side, you got your daddy, who is older than your mama a little bit. He's still living, still going to work every day. And he was your role model in the business world, who did very well in business. And just talk a little bit about your dad, Jim, and the influence that he's had on you. We've talked about it, and you're going to hear some more folks about what Jimmy has accomplished, but his daddy is one of the most successful businessmen that I've ever known. So just talk about your dad a little bit and what you learned from him.
Well, Bruce, this is, again, now that we're 70, I think a lot about the opportunities that you and I both had. And as I think about mine, to be able to grow up and work with my dad and observe him. When my dad went to work at the Chevrolet place in Reynolds, Georgia, we lived down the street, a block away, right near the Baptist church where our house was. He would walk to work, walk back home for lunch, and walk back after lunch. And he would often take me with him. And I was 2 years old, sitting on his knee when he was selling cars to customers. I can't ever remember not being in one of our family's car dealerships. And so as a teenager, Daddy emphasized to Bob and me both that it was very important to work. His teaching method was not to give you an outline of how to go do something. His teaching method was to give us an assignment of what he wanted accomplished. And he was open for as many questions as we had, as much guidance as we needed. But he didn't take excuses of why we didn't accomplish it. Actually, that's one of his phrases. It said, "Son, don't bring me an excuse, bring me a solution." And through all of that and watching him, he was very skilled at everything he did. When I went to college and started studying business at Georgia Southern, I remember in my accounting classes, I was fortunate that I could visualize what we were studying because I could think about the car dealership when it came to inventories and cash flow and receivables. There's so many lessons of everything that he touched. He mentored me. I was his observer, his student, his son. I can't really describe it any more detailed than that because it was all encompassing. And we talked a lot. Daddy and I always talked. When he was first starting off, he had a wrecker, and at nighttime he would make wrecker calls from working at the car dealership. And when I'd hear the phone ring in the dark, He'd get up and I'd hear him getting up, putting on his clothes. I'd stand there in my pajamas and wanting to go with him. And he'd take me on the record calls with him. I'd stand in the seat next to him with my arm around his shoulder as he went to work. So observing him, but also him teaching me the importance of relationships with others. I remember as a teenager sitting in the dealership with him, I always sat and watched him sell cars and listened. And I always heard this term about a good deal. Customers would often say, Mr. Jimmy, is that a good deal? Or Daddy would suggest that was a good deal. And I remember one day asking him, Daddy, how do you know if it's a good deal or not? He said, son, it's pretty simple. He said, if you don't give a customer a fair price, they'll never come back to you. If you don't treat the company and the dealership fairly, you won't be here when they need to come back. He said, a deal is a good deal if it's fair to both parties. It's got to be good for all the people in the transaction. And that's the rule that I've lived by.
And what was interesting, when you came back out of college, he actually recommended or suggested that you go in competition with him and open a Ford place right there in the same town.
Exactly.
Isn't that a crazy story?
Exactly. Yeah. So that was probably the shock of my life, I think. So, Bruce, when we were growing up in Reynolds, there were decisions that as young boys we had to make. And I'll give you the examples. Were you a Dodgers or a Yankees fan? You know how much we talked about that. And then another one was, were you a Chevrolet or a Ford man? And a lot of times that was decided by your father if they drove Chevrolets or Fords. Probably another one that we never got involved in, were you a Methodist or a Baptist? That was your heritage.
Right.
But I was clearly a Chevrolet man. My granddad had been a Chevrolet dealer, my dad, my two uncles. And so the local Ford dealership went out of business, and Daddy suggested that I become the Ford dealer. I was 25. I had very little money saved. I didn't have enough money saved to buy a car. And I didn't understand exactly what that meant. So I asked him, I said, Daddy, what are you talking about? He said, son, the Ford dealership has gone out of business. I think you should become the Ford dealer. And so I talked to Ford, and it was in a very tough economic time in 1980. Interest rates were rising. They soon hit 18% after I actually became the dealer.
I remember.
I had very little capital. I borrowed the rest of it, borrowed the money on my own. But I think the reason that the bank took the chance on me was because of my dad.
Sure.
Even though he wasn't formally backing it up, I think they knew that failure was not going to be an option for me. But I didn't think that. I figured I'd last 1 year and my business career was going to start and end in the same year in 1980. It was tough, but I learned a lot. But my dad also taught me that he was absolutely my competitor. I'll never forget the day that from the closed up dealership, I inherited an old piece of inventory, a 1980 Mercury Cougar that was cream colored with a burgundy vinyl top and burgundy velour seats and burgundy shag carpet. And I held that car and I was paying 18% interest on it. Finally got a customer that agreed to buy it. On the way to the bank, they stopped by the Chevrolet dealership. And I waited, and I didn't know they had stopped at the Chevrolet dealership. I waited and waited and waited. And I finally called my dad and said, Daddy, how's business today? He said, son, it's good. I said, what have you sold? And he told me he'd sold a Cutlass Oldsmobile. And I said, to who? Who was the customer? And he told me the customer's name. And it broke my heart. It was my customer. I said, Daddy, do you realize that he was looking at that car? He had agreed to buy that beige Mercury that I'd had on the lot for a year and a half. He said, I do, son. He said he really wanted to buy your car. It was a hard sell for me to make. And it crushed me. I couldn't believe it. And I went on to tell him that I couldn't believe it. He said, son, this is a grown man's business. You should have never lost control of your customer.
He was teaching you a lesson.
He taught me a lesson. I promise you. I remember that one like it was yesterday.
So here's the thing that I know, and the reason I got you to say this stuff, folks, is you're gonna come back on the next episode. Jimmy and I are going to talk about what it was like growing up in the 60s in a little bitty southern town and playing Little League baseball and going to church camp and being entertained on how we were entertained ourselves and having a garage band and looking at new cars in the backyard because his granddaddy owned the car dealership so we could see the new cars, going to high school together, We got some funny stories playing golf together. You're going to get to hear two old friends talk, but my point of to introduce this episode that you're going to hear, the episode coming up, is that he got who he is, and he's done very well in life. I know Jimmy as well as anybody. He got it from his mama and his daddy. You heard his mama talk about the thing that she sees biggest in him is his heart for people and his caring for people. But he's also been a very successful businessman. He's a hard-nosed businessman. He's been doing it a long time, and he got this business acumen from his daddy. So a perfect blend of two different completely personalities produces somebody like Jimmy. So that's kind of his foundation. So when we come back and you guys tune in on the next episode, we're going to take you through growing up in a little town called Reynolds, Georgia in the 60s. You're going to be listening to two people that have been friends for 70 years. I think we both still got our minds. So we'll talk about stories as they come up, and some of them are going to be funny. Stories with girls and dates and going to concerts, and we got some funny stories that happened on the golf course. So y'all tune in on the next episode, and you're going to hear these two old guys talking about their life in Reynolds, Georgia. Thank you for listening.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.